So first of all, I wanted to say thank you for all taking the time to be here. So I know there's a lot of different options that y'all have to choose for. There's a lot of really, really great presenters and information. So I appreciate you taking this time and space to be here. Okay, so before we dive in too deep, I just wanted to disclose, and y'all seen all these disclaimers before, that the opinions, the stories, and everything that's expressed, they are my own opinions. They are not that of PMI. Additionally, I've used 5 different companies to comprise my presentation. So the information that I share on these companies is based on my own internal and extensive research. I hope I'm as accurate as possible, but with as any companies, the world environment, things are changing a lot. So that's the disclaimer. All right, so some of the different learning objectives. I know this is a lot on this screen, but my true goal is to talk to y'all about how to balance growth, how to balance your own uniqueness, how to drive towards meaningful outcomes, how to encourage belonging, and then also how to build ownership in your teams. And then a little bit about me. I am from a town called Lafayette, Louisiana. This is kind of known in Louisiana as Cajun country. We're about 3 hours outside of New Orleans, but I spent about 25 years in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. For about 7 years, I was the leader of that chapter. So being from Louisiana, I believe in a lot of spice, a lot of creativity, and just doing things very differently, like Mardi Gras. So you're going to see some of these themes weaved throughout here. So first, I wanted to kind of set the stage and say that projects are always evolving. They always evolved well before the pandemic. But literally the rate of change that we have been facing for the past 5 years coming out of the pandemic, the introduction of AI has taken over our entire universe. We cannot escape the rate of change. It basically calls for a new recipe book and a new playbook because what we might have even had last week could have significantly changed. And in addition to that, projects now require a lot of emotional agility. I love that PMI actually changed soft skills to power skills. I heard that in some of the conversations today, and to me, it makes so much sense because I'm one of these people that I can learn technology. It's hard at times, but that's a process that I can learn. Power skills, creativity, influence, accountability, ownership, conflict resolution, those are tougher to identify. So as we go through this, I kind of want some of y'all to think about your current recipe cards at work. What's working well, what's not working, and what you can take from this to tweak in the future. So got GUMBO. This is definitely a Louisiana thing. I have a lot of AI images throughout this because 3 years ago I started challenging myself to do AI pictures. However, every single thing you see there is pictures of gumbo that I've eaten in my life. Sometimes Louisiana people are a little bit of snob. We will tell you, you better not put tomatoes in the gumbo. We make fun of New Orleans and Lafayette, that's a New Orleans thing. But anyway, it's like projects. Everybody has their own gumbo. Everybody's got the different spice or the different taste buds for things. So that was kind of how I came up with this topic. When PMI first came out and put out the call for speakers, I had done something called GUMBO a couple of years ago that was geared specifically to a room of PMI volunteer leaders. It meant something different at that time, but I've always had a love-hate with acronyms, but I think acronyms are ultimately make it easier to remember things and to relate concepts and frameworks. So gumbo was fun for me. I love the food, but even the origin of gumbo came from so many different cultures coming together and fusing their flavors and blending their roots and their different culture to create something. So I feel like it's a good metaphor that's built to feed learning and long-term success. So here's a little bit of the flavor profile of how I've defined gumbo for this specific presentation. And again, think about your projects as I go through this. So the first element is growth. We all want to grow, both personally and professionally, but we can't truly grow if we don't step outside of our comfort zones and if we don't stretch ourselves and try to learn new things, meet new people, meet people who have different ways of working and thinking than we do. The second one is uniqueness. Every project, every path, every person is going to be different. I'm going to have a call out to one of my friends, Russell Parker, right quick. He spoke yesterday on the lessons of a Marine. And one of the stories that he told really illustrated how every project, path, and person is different. Now, Russ, being very vulnerable, told of a story where he was very busy and under duress, and he used a plan and kind of carried it forward. Situations changed, and he was called out on copying that plan. He owned up to it. He grew a lot better because of that. But it's one of those things, you can take lessons learned from all your projects historically, but you better be able to tailor that to today's constraints and what you're going through. The N is for meaningful outcomes. We were almost classically trained as project managers, time, scope, budget. You hit those things, you're a success. We've all learned that is not true anymore. PMI has the whole project success thing that they do as well. And they are constantly evolving what their definitions of success is as well. So that meaningful outcomes is ensuring your projects deliver purpose and value. And then belonging. Belonging is something that's always going to be around. One of my favorite stories I tell is when I was a chapter leader, I was at the chapter level whenever we went through the pandemic. One of the huge things we had to deal with is how to bring people back virtually. A few years into it, I felt a level of, I guess, success, or kind of like I made a difference, because we had people from the Bahamas, we had people from different countries that were coming to our Baton Rouge virtual meetings. And they would tell me, y'all are so friendly, you make us feel like we belong. And that just hit my heart, because I was like, that's what we should be doing in our workplaces as well. And then ownership. People bring innovation, people, when they feel like they own part of the project and the outcome, they innovate more. Okay, so this is our roadmap. Because some of my ideas can go out in left field, when I was originally architecting this, I thought, all right, let me think about companies that people in a global audience might recognize, so I can tell a story about these companies and how I'm envisioning them blending together the gumbo. So I'm going to go over the next slides of each of these companies and tell you why I think LinkedIn Learning is great for growth, why I think Pixar is a perfect example for uniqueness, how Zoom, which is not obvious on here, created meaningful outcomes, how Spotify remapped belonging, and how Adobe Creative Cloud inspired ownership. So first, we're going to start with what growth is for the G in gumbo. So at its basic roots, the growth mindset is wanting to upskill, wanting to push yourself further, whether that's you want to climb the career ladder or whether you want to go across into the career lattice and diversify your skills. So growth mindset fuels resilience and adaptability. And then I've also got in here, I think mentorship culture multiplies the leadership capacity. I don't do things on my own. Like, I have a lot of people that are like, you did that and you did all of that. I learned many, many, many moons ago that I didn't like it when people took credit away from me. So if somebody's like, you did all of this, I'm like, no, my team did this. Or I'm only here because this person did this part and helped me out because I cannot create all pieces of the puzzle. So just keep that in mind when you're mentoring. And even if you think, I'm only here, nobody can gain value from me. That's not true. I've lived a life. I'm here to tell you that you get down the road and you realize, wow, I really had a change on that person. And because of that, changed their trajectory. So LinkedIn, before I dive into the specifics, it was like, this one to me was kind of an obvious for growth. They've been around for a long time. I mean, I know I remember LinkedIn when it was lynda.com and Gale courses, and it was at the library and all of the different things. This story is going to be more about what they did after the pandemic, but they reimagined learning in the face of global uncertainty, and they had to continually redesign for relevance, resilience, and reach. So the first step that they took was really just managing the perception. With every company, your brand, your face, your something, it's controlling how people perceive you and if they're going to want to engage with you. So LinkedIn, and I mean, we all saw this shift over time where they started personalizing their learning more. And all of a sudden, I don't know if y'all remember the phase a couple of years back where it was like every other post on LinkedIn was somebody sharing their LinkedIn certification. That was a rebuilding phase for them. And then, of course, when AI came into the picture a few years after the pandemic, LinkedIn is one of those companies that started blending AI with empathy to model growth. AI is an interesting thing, and it's like we realize now it's in the forefront, but it's always been in the background with some of the things, the learning behaviors, Facebook stalking us, pulling up recommendations. The tools that we're all using, if you're putting in that you want to learn on communications or AWS, it's remembering those things and helping to provide you with something that feels personalized to you. So, and then to own their success, they took charge of learning success. They started kind of doing a shift where learning was purpose driven. Have y'all ever really just stepped back and said, I need to learn this certain thing at this time because it'll get me to the next level, as opposed to I have to learn all of the things at once? I think the step where it's more purpose-driven learning and we don't feel this huge rush to have to learn everything all at once, which is overwhelming, is important. We need to kind of learn why we're wanting to grow. So they also kind of did a business push too. Not only was LinkedIn becoming a company that helped the individuals, if those individuals were taking charge of their learning success, then they were directly able to translate their value more to their organization. And then course correcting in real time, this is the reassessing, relentlessly reassessment. I always get confused on which R comes first with this one, but they partnered with different companies and they let that drive some of their learning paths and their course design and choices. And then again, AI kind of tailored learning to personal engagement and goals. Now, by a show of hands, who in here works for a company that has LinkedIn Learning or a learning management system embedded? Okay, a lot. What about places like Coursera? Is Coursera in the mix, or Skillsoft, or? Okay. And it's interesting to see that too, and see what companies are prioritizing with their different training programs that they've got. And then the expanding the perspectives. This is where they started teaching the world to learn together. I don't know, I do remember a time where learning felt a little bit kind of like a solo effort type of thing that you did. And the good thing about, that silver lining to me from the pandemic, it forced all of us to get a little bit more accustomed to going global, virtually connecting, talking to other people that were outside of our local area and seeing what they were learning and pulling ideas from them. So LinkedIn just kept evolving. I mean, right now I think, I'm trying to remember my stats. I know it's like 36 languages, but I believe they've got over 24,000 courses that they have. Over the years, I've become connected with some actual LinkedIn learning instructors, which is really, that's interesting to me to know those people that are doing those courses behind the scene and seeing what kind of impact it has. So, kind of as a personal reflection, and we're going to save the questions to the end, but I at least want to highlight this as we go through these different company journeys. On an individual level, I want you to think, where do you want to be a year from now, and what specific learning will get you there? And then on an organizational level, I want you to think about, how do we make space at an organization for our people to learn? You know, are there lunch and learn sessions? Are there committed training programs? Or is it everybody just do the 8 to 10 hours a day and don't talk to each other, and if they learn, they're going to be off sides? Hopefully it's the first option. So moving on to uniqueness. And I'm going to check my time too, just to keep it honest and keep all of us on time and track. But uniqueness, I truly believe that creativity is currency. How many of y'all went to the keynote this morning with Damien Kulash? That's pretty wild. Like when he said planning equals play, like that is my brain. I have a lot of friends that are in this room that know some of my different sides of creativity, and I love it. And I think it's something that can truly, truly, truly help organizations, because if we're all thinking the same way, we're not going to solve nearly as many problems. So, and to be creative, sometimes you got to be a little crazy, and sometimes you have to take some risks. So even on an organization level, you know, one thing I would love for y'all to take back from this is even getting the organization to embrace risk a little bit more, you know. And again, Russ, I'm looking at you with the risk stuff, but I'm thinking opportunity, you know, weakness, threat, but it's like there's so many opportunities in risks that if you don't take it, you won't know what the reward is. So a company that does this very, very well, I honestly couldn't, this was the first one that jumped out in my head, of course, was Pixar. So Pixar is powered by emotion and total experimentation. I mean, they're really kind of out there and they're weird, but like in the best way. When I say weird, it's like keep Austin weird, just do different things that you don't always have to go with the herd or follow everybody else. And having creativity, you know, integrity, it gives your teams permission to protect the vision. So for managing the perceptions, Pixar has got what they call the brain trust. You know, so when that company was first formed, it was formed by people that were wanting to get into animation. They were research scientists. It was cutting edge tech. But there was a lot of creative storytellers in there too. So one of the things that the brain trust system does, and this reminds me of our first keynote speaker, Kim Scott, her radical candor. That group gives permission to say, okay, you've got a pretty good story here, but in this instance, this person would probably be crying, or this phrase is falling a little bit flat, or it just sounds a little bit stilted. So they constantly go through things to make sure that the emotion is hitting. So one of these, Toy Story, I mean, a lot of times, again, it's kids' movie, but it was literally about Woody's jealousy of Buzz, their identity crisis, the fear of being replaced, which I think as humans, no matter how confident we can be, you know, imposter syndrome. Fear of being replaced, fear of all the layoffs in the world, and are we next on the chopping block? But it was that arc of that story that made it more human and made it actually connect with us. And I think too, in the world of AI, again, these are That's not a Pixar image, that's an AI image of Pixar. And again, I love AI, but the fact is we're all still human and we need to keep that in it. So the audience first storytelling established trust over trends. Okay, to own project success. This is one of my favorite because of course this is gumbo, so ratatouille, the chef in the kitchen. But creative ownership gives individuals pride in the vision. So for some, has somebody not seen Pixar? I mean, not Ratatouille. Who hadn't seen Ratatouille? Everybody's seen Ratatouille, or just somebody not raising their hand? It's okay. It's okay. So it's an adorable story. Basically, it's a little cartoon. Remy is this little rat, and he just loves to cook. But again, I mean, think about how we would all react if there was a rat in the kitchen. I mean, they would come close us down. It's the most awful thing ever. So, but Remy had to get creative because he loved cooking so much, and he envisioned the fact that he belonged in that kitchen. So he worked through linguini to blend everything in until he could be truly himself and occupy the role that he was meant to be in. So it goes to show, even though Remy was an individual, to really find his place, he did have to work through other people. So teams contribute beyond roles to elevate every story. So in the rewriting to get it right, the relentless reassessing. Before we flip into how The Incredibles comes into this, I'll go back to Pixar to say that they're constantly rewriting, they're constantly redoing drafts. That's where the brain trust comes in. Same thing with us as project managers. You know, do your plans come out perfectly the first time? No. This, I mean, you know, PMI and pitching things, because I have people, how did you get the speaking thing? I said, well, they did the call for speakers, I think around January to March, pitched it, waited for a while, found out in May, go through a series of things and created all this along. A few days ago, I literally threw out the script because I was trying, you know, and there's several people in this room that know me, that have heard me going on and on and on until I get on stage about, I threw out the script, I don't know what to say, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. The more I thought about it, I was like, okay, it's rewriting it to get it right. The Incredibles was that story, as is all of Pixar's, but even the movie itself, the dad was trying to cling on to his glory days. He was trying to do everything by himself. And then he finally realized to actually get anywhere, I have to involve my family, let my little family be part of my team and come out on top. You know, so a lot of us we're scared of failure. Failure is only fuel. You're not going to knock it out of the park the first time. You're not going to do anything perfect the first time. It's like exercise. It's all in the repetition, doing it, repeating it, having the humility to say, I'm not perfect, I will never be perfect, but I'm going to keep evolving. And from the project manager hat, even having those conversations with your stakeholders going, okay, this didn't quite work out the way that we thought it was going to. How can we go back to the drawing board and keep moving this thing forward and doing better? And then the expand perspectives. One of the stories that they did, you know, was maybe a little bit lesser known one, but Turning Red. So Turning Red, Pixar's gotten better about including very diverse voices. So in this one, it was mainly, I keep having to remind myself not to say Maylin, who we all a lot of us know, but Maylin is a 13-year-old girl that's Chinese and Canadian. She's, of course, dealing with all of the teenage hormones and different things of that nature, but when she gets emotional, she turns into a giant red panda. And another thing with Pixar, the female creator of this, you know, was also from that culture. So it promoted different cultures, different voices, and kind of like the irony of things is the more honest and transparent that you are with your team, with your stakeholders. You don't have to have it perfect. You just have to be a human being and you have to own up to things. And it makes the story stick better when you have the courage to do that. Okay, so back to our reflections. And again, I am going to save space for questions at the end. So I just want you to think, what's one of your quirks or one of your ways of seeing the world around you that you hold back in your work because you're kind of scared that people are going to judge you and think that you're weird? And on an organizational level, does your organization create space for people with different quirks, different perspectives to bring their voices to the table? Okay, moving on to meaningful outcomes. We talked a little bit at the beginning that projects have evolved a lot from time, cost, and scope to much bigger. We need to make sure that we're delivering value. Value, again, it can be a vague word, but it's going to mean something different to everybody, every company. So in those initial investigations with people, why do you want this product? What is it going to change? How is it going to change things? What are you hoping to achieve? And how is that going to help your organization grow? And so project managers, I think of us as the architects of meaningful outcomes. So kind of a random example here. I mean, Zoom, I think, found a way to create meaningful outcomes, but a little bit later after the pandemic. So they wound up evolving from what was just a video tool to a full collaboration hub. They now currently, and of course a lot of products, many companies can fit this, where they do AI and customer-driven designs to help shape their proactive solutions. I want to go back to a little bit of the story. So I had never used Zoom or anything like that before 2020. We were all using it in 2020, probably along with a lot of other tools as well. I mean, I remember working for a healthcare company where one of my actual projects was centralizing a communication standard because we were all using Zoom, Skype, Jabber, Cisco WebEx. We actually weren't using Teams, but it became, which one of these is going to win? Really could have just been simple pros and cons. It wasn't, and it just got very drug out with that whole thing. But with Zoom kind of became the bad one, I guess, because they were the first out there where it was like they were a lifesaver, but then it was like, oh my gosh, I have to go in here. It's the Brady Bunch, it's the black boxes, nobody knows what the mute button is, somebody's chewing on camera. I hate my life. So they had to think about that. That was their perception. I mean, even though they helped everybody, at some point companies are going to get into the bad list for something they did, and they're going to go from a fan favorite to a fall. So they had to rebrand and just envision how they're going to be more collaborative. So that marketing, their marketing that they started doing afterwards reinforced the shift with the clear signals of change. This was something, and again, I admitted at the beginning that a lot of this was research to identify the right ones. I've always had a Zoom account. Most of the time I'm on Microsoft Teams. One of the things I did not realize until I took on this project was just how robust Zoom has gotten. So if you wind up going into templates and project templates in your Zoom account, some of you might be surprised that they've got about 100 specific project tools, SWOT analysis, Miro maps, fishbowl or fish. Is it fishbowl? Yeah, the diagram. So how many of y'all knew this? I don't think Microsoft Teams has this. How many of y'all go bouncing between Canva to Miro to all the subscription tools, trying to find what you need in one spot because you can't find a SWOT diagram and then you have to create it from scratch? It's got this. So it was one of the changes that they made to stay relevant in the marketplace and figure out how to differentiate themselves from some of the competitors. So the relentless reassessment, we go through this every time. They had to do beta testing and constantly refine their features through enterprise pilots. They wound up partnering with a lot of different businesses and enterprises and pushing that out and getting their feedback to see what works and what's not working. And then their modular design meant that they didn't have to toss out the entire gumbo and start from scratch. They could literally just remove different features and plug in and kind of incrementally tweak those different things. And then room for more, this is expanding our perspectives again. They did this by diversifying with different industries, healthcares, nonprofits, different target user groups to help shape their feature development. They're also accessible by design. They've got the translation, they've got the closed caption. All of those different things increases the reach. So reflection on meaningful outcomes. On your personal level, how do you connect your daily tasks to a greater sense of purpose and value? And then organizationally, how do you know, or how do you work towards defining if people are going to remember the project's deliver, or let me rephrase this. It's basically asking, will people remember the project deliverables or the difference? So while we all want to complete things on time, I think there's a lot of us that have that internal need to create a legacy and something that lives beyond just a milestone on a Gantt chart. So the belonging in GUMBO. Inclusion fully empowers people to show up. I have always believed, ever since I was a little kid, I was always that person that it was like I go run up to everybody and make friends with everybody. And sometimes, even growing up, and then certainly in companies and just everything with politics, it seems like so many times we focus more on what divides us rather than what actually brings us together. And I'd really love to inspire, influence people to think about how we're much more alike than different, and realize that if we make people feel like they belong in the room, at the table, on a project team, in a project, we're going to drive home success a lot more. So Spotify, that was one, and again, researching just different things, different company behaviors, and this is more of an internal facet on belonging. A lot of my reading was that they had DEI really embedded into their leadership and daily practice. They're still remote first. I know a lot of us have gone back to in person. There's been a lot of just wildness with that the past couple of years, but this is a company that still does remote first. They had something called the Band Manifesto. Still able to go find that online, where it lists out their different work values and what they strive to practice to keep their people connected and belonging. So mic check. This is actually, am I right? Just a second. Okay. So this is more on matching the words to the action, which is managing perceptions. So your leaders' actions need to really reflect the values. I know a lot of us, we all know people that say one thing and we don't believe a word of it, because it's like the actions that they're putting forth is not matching the words that are coming out of their mouth. So from whatever end, they embraced this, tried to walk the walk and do the talk, and they had a lot of transparency in their policies that helped to strengthen trust. So creating a culture and driving impact. They tended to let their employees create a lot of different rituals, like the self-organizing teams. They had a lot of different employee resource groups, and they even had what was called belonging groups that they meet and kind of tweak things on those. We get. And thank you, Joseph, for earlier knowing I would need water. So, but I truly believe that belonging boosts performance that can actually be measured by delivery metrics. I want to stop and ask a quick question just with a volunteer for the audience, and hopefully I will get one. Have any of you ever had an instance in your organization where you put together kind of these belonging groups and behavioral things where you've been able to measure the success and see the outcome? Okay. I don't know if this necessarily boosted performance, but as I'm going through this, it reminded me of something I did years ago when I worked for Department of Health. Beside the regular roles and all the different hats that I wore, I was on a voluntary wellness committee. And the wellness committee, we'd have competitions on Fitbit. We would do different things. We bring in the Alzheimer's Society. We bring in what was called laughter yoga, just different things. And the management was able to say, okay, there's actually been a spike in performance because people feel more engaged. When we took those moments just to focus on our wellness, be kind people to one another, we were actually able to go back to our desks, or we were in cubicle forms at the time, back to our box and be a little bit more creative and do more if we were able to take those moments to kind of belong and take care of our wellness. And so playback for progress. You know, I think that culture evolves continuously through feedback loops. That's that relentless reassessment. You know, how many of you work in an organization where they don't reassess things, where like your sprint or your lessons learned is just a one-time activity? Does anybody still work? Okay. It's tough at times. I've done both, but I appreciate where I am now with Project Success Academy and the fact that we continually refined things on a basis to rekeel in a better direction before we go too off track. You know, and then just with Spotify, having pulse checks to ensure that belonging is being consistently measured. Okay, question to the audience, because belonging is like it's a very, very, very large word. Who here considers their organization to be very proactive and good at checking in on people and making them feel like they belong? Okay. That's still a good showing. I hope for some of you that, you know, are at organizations that aren't the great at doing this, that you're able to have some sort of influence over them. And I'll say this from like project manager perspective, I was not always what I thought to be the leader at work on the organizational chart. You know, but it's making people feel like they belong and like they're connected to the purpose is important. So diverse tracks and unified vision. So this is, don't laugh at me, I'm losing track of myself. So this is that vulnerability of admitting things. So with expanding the perspective, you know, Spotify just did localization with intent to shape the culture. A concrete example I'll give for that, you know, I admitted that I was a leader at PMI Baton Rouge. Baton Rouge is incredibly different from Lafayette, which is incredibly different from New Orleans. I remember we all operate on regions. So one of the larger regions was PMI Dallas in Region 6. And I remember a lot of people are like, why can't Baton Rouge be more like Dallas? And I had to really just stand my ground and say, well, because we're Baton Rouge, because this is our industry. This is our people over here, even, like I said, Baton Rouge and Lafayette, different industries. You know, so having that belonging and respecting the different cultures in different places is super important. Kind of have a thing about even the words that we use and understanding the meanings of those words, because In the States, we may say something that somebody from another country interprets in a completely different way. So to truly reinforce belongings, if you have members on your team that are from different areas of the world, maybe even spending a little bit of time to learn about those cultures, those differences, and the communication styles can really help to drive belonging. So reflection on that individually. And because we have a few minutes, I'm gonna ask on an individual level for a person to raise their hand, what's one ritual or moment that made you feel like you belong? Can I have a volunteer? Yes. What's your name?
My name is Nitin.
So what's one moment that, or ritual that you have that makes you feel like you belong?
With a short example, almost 2 years back, when we had come out of one of our very big project,
Okay.
and that time I just decided that I will be leaving. Probably I thought I'm done with it. It's a long year. I'm with the company 11 years. I started when maybe at the start of my career was then in Thailand. I moved to Europe. I came to USA, and I thought maybe something new. And everything was settled, and suddenly they said, "Okay, you just choose." They gave me three options. If I want to stay, you just select any three options. Discussion were not going very well, and very well in the right direction where I was thinking. And then HR, the guys who were expecting me to join, nothing was going in the perfect direction, and not what I liked. And I decided, okay, now I think it is enough time. We are spending too much time. And suddenly I got a phone call from my mentor in my company. Okay, now our group CEO has decided something, and he has an option for you. So he gave me two options, and he said that he just told. I said, how I'm very small employee. Why he wants to get involved? And he was just walking into the lobby, and he just saying, Nitin's things I will handle. You don't have to worry. And I was surprised. Do you still remember me? He said, yes, he remembers you from the day you joined the company. And then he gave me options, joining him as a chief of staff, staying in the US, whatever I like to do. And he also told me a few things, what I will get if I stay.
Right.
It was not just the talk, it was a very big amount compared to my basic salary, I would say. So that's why I feel like, okay, he does not remember me, but he thinks about me.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sure. I appreciate it. You know, and then just on the organizational, as a leader, how do you make make sure that every voice adds to the mix? Okay, so we're to our final letter of GUMBO, which is ownership. So ownership is something that inspires pride and excellence in the results. So when everyone contributes to the team's signature success. In terms of Louisiana and gumbo cook-offs, I mean, this is the thing that we do over there all the time. You know, on weekends, we have a lot of festivals in Lafayette, and these big companies will go out there with their tents, their swags, and they will actually do the gumbo cook-off. Usually not just one person. I mean, the pots are enormous to start with. And then just all of the different ingredients and coordination and timing of things requires the team. You know, but them being there together, there's no one person that owns every single piece. It takes all of them to contribute to it. So Adobe was one, you know, that kind of stood out to me, you know, that their creator-driven culture was powered by innovation, Firefly, let me backtrack, Firefly and Gen AI. I remember when Creative Cloud came out, and a lot of people don't see themselves as a creator or a creative, you know, but this was one company that was out there trying to say that everybody gets a piece of the ownership and how they can do this. So during the pandemic, one of their big thrusts was that needed to be responsible with AI, and that this responsible innovation helped to emphasize the ethics and the trust. So managing perception. Perception is the product. I mean, I think we've seen a lot of companies, they're doing really big and they're doing really well, but we don't trust them. I will say that one of my first research, led me to SpaceX and Elon Musk, and I was like, no, that's not going to be the best example for me to include at a global conference, because again, whatever the product is, there's perceptions that are out there of certain personalities, and so brands and companies need to be aware of that too. So in this instance, their brand trust was anchored in transparency and ethical practices. Trying to remember what the exact phrase was. There was something in the research that I had that when they originally went out there and started using the AI, in Firefly and all of that kind of stuff to elevate their product, they really wanted the open dialogue from people to know where the AI was coming from, where it was sourced from. Again, some of this is always an evolving conversation every single day with AI. So ownership is the new masterpiece. That's part of owning project success. Creative accountability ensures that ownerships create signature value. And then teams that own the delivery can connect the features to the impact. How many of you work directly with developers? It's project manager. Okay. So with a lot of developers, or at least this is a behavior that I've observed, many times it's give them their specific instructions and be a little bit hands off, because many of them are actually pretty good about being self-organized and self-managed. As project managers, we'll need to check in to make sure, of course, that they've got the information that they need, but there's not any blockers that if something's going wrong, somebody raises their hand in the process and says, hey, I got a problem, can you help me with this? But with Adobe, it was something where a lot of their teams were just self-managed. They owned that part of the process, and when they could own that part of the process and feel responsible and accountable for it, they put more effort into what the final product was. And the art of reassessment. Small changes drive meaningful impact. When we're doing reassessment, I don't want people to think, okay, I just have to scrap this entirely. A lot of times it's really looking at it and thinking about what's working well, what's not working well, what can we take out, and how do we layer in the new changes to keep this going forward. And then, of course, just driving in the iteration and agile designs, kind of mirrored what Adobe's work style was. So the expanding perspectives, Adobe again was another very global company. With doing all of these, I had to find companies that really were very widely known. So the global impact and the talent was shared again across different hubs and scales. And then they had access for all through inclusive AI and different tools. And that I remember with AI too, like I talked to a lot of people that are using it, and different people have biases against it, but I remember, I do photography as well. So a lot of the discussions in the past have centered around whether photographers are manipulating their work, that's passed off as real. And I remember having one lady say to me, because we're going back and forth with a little bit of like, if you're selling your prints and admitting it's real or admitting it's AI, she was telling me about her niece, who was in a wheelchair, and she has no use of her arms. So she cannot do photography as many of us would be able to, so she creates through the computer, and that's her work. And I had to step back for a moment. I said, you know what, you're right. you're right, because one way that like AI has enhanced my life, I've always had an imagination, but I've never been able to draw. Like, I don't know how to draw. You will get the prettiest stick figure you've ever seen. But I loved that with AI, I could take some of my random thoughts that were running around, bring them to life. And as long as I'm telling people, okay, no, I didn't draw this. This is AI. It gave me a creative license. And I think that this was a company that did that well as well. So our final reflection is on ownership. I just want y'all to think, and all of y'all are going to have a different example of what's one project that you worked on that truly felt like yours. And then on an organizational level, when a project ends, do we leave a legacy that others can build upon? Do we document our lessons? Do we train other people to carry our work forward? Okay, so at this point, y'all all know what the secret spice is, but this was the teaser. So the recipe reveal is gumbo and its ingredients plus more, the heat that simmers it. And I think that the two work together really well. If you think about the framework of gumbo along with PMI's more, it's gives you a different way of achieving success. So some of the key takeaways from this, you can apply this at an individual scale and an organizational scale. It's also an action-oriented mindset. Be that person that's more proactive rather than reactive. Going back to growth, sometimes you have to chase growth and take ownership of that. Every one of those gumbo ingredients matter. Gotta have the growth, the uniqueness, go towards your meaningful outcomes, create belonging, and inspire other people to take ownership. And then when you stir in the managing perceptions, the owning project success, that continual relentless reassessment, and expanding your perspectives larger, that's a way to really kick up the rest. So what you think, what's one ingredient that we've overlooked? And how do we start stirring it in, starting now? So I'm going to open it up for questions and observations. This is my LinkedIn profile. Just random challenge. I talked to PMI and on the level of sustainability, we were encouraged not to do handouts. But I will tell y'all, for anybody that connects with me on LinkedIn and sends me a message, I will send you my personal favorite recipe of Cajun, Lafayette, Louisiana gumbo. It will be back when I don't fly out until Sunday. So it might be about Tuesday or Wednesday before I respond, but I will keep up with it. And the recipe is literally just a recipe with actual food that y'all could try and practice. So, but with that, I think we've got right at 7 minutes. So I'd love the questions.